All right, so what you should know about your students. Well, the first thing you should realize is if you're working in a middle school or a high school, you're already going to know this if you're elementary school, but even high schoolers, even middle schoolers are still kids. They're still kids. They might act like adults, they might be so mature and serious and everything else, but you have to remember that they are still kids. And you should always realize that they don't always say what they mean. If they're saying one thing, they might not mean that at all. There's 100 reasons why they might be saying something that's not true or something else, but you should just realize that your students might be saying, an angry thing, but they don't mean that. They're probably upset about their parents, or they someone other kids said something to them, and so they're kind of an enigma. So the kids, you just sort of have to observe them, but don't take anything negative personally. The next thing that I will tell you that you should know about your students is that they need you to be strict. They don't want you to be a pushover, because the people that are in their class that are walking over teachers, are getting fights in the teachers, that teachers are having a hard time with, they've been dealing with that for years and years and years, and they don't need you to be just another teacher who gets into the same fight with the same kid. They want you to be strict, have a classroom where they can learn, they can relax, because they know that kid's not just on the prowl, and they really need you to have that controlled environment. There are enough teachers in every school where those kids run wild, they're bullies, they're saying mean things, they're taking over the class, they're making the class not have as much fun. The kids are sick of hearing from those, loud or obnoxious kids. They really want you to be strict. So if that's something that you're going to struggle with, it's better that you realize now, hey, I need to start, with some self-confidence exercises or whatever it is you need to do to realize that I am not going to be a pushover. I am not going to be someone who's, arguing with a kid. I told you to get into your seat. No, why aren't you in your seat? Those are two totally different things. So the students, you don't, they act like they want you to be loosey-goosey, not strict at all, but they will appreciate you more if you're a strict teacher. It's 100% true. The teachers that are the biggest pushovers are the ones that they like the least. Next thing you should know about your students is that they will rise to your expectations. If you expect them to do something that's great, and to do something that's interesting, and to do something that is well thought out, they'll rise to that expectation. They might not rise to it right away, but they will get there if you help them, if you push them, if you hold them accountable, and if you're kind of strict about it, they'll rise to that expectation. Of course, you need to set a proper expectation. You can't just, expect college level work out of an 8th grader, but if you're expecting them to do something, they'll rise to that expectation if you make it clear that you actually expect it. They'll push against high expectations, and there's so many incentives for teachers to give up on high expectations, but it's worth it to push past that initial, hesitancy, and get to the point where you're expecting good work and you're getting good work, at least out of most of the kids. It's worth it to have high expectations for your students. Now, I've always said success helping kids understand why they should do their homework. That's not to say I get all my kids to do all their homework all the time, but in general, kids want to know why they should do things. So if they should do this homework, prepare beforehand. Why should you do this homework? Well, this homework is to practice you to do this, because next week you're going to learn this, and if you don't understand this, then you won't be able to do that. Having something where you're explaining why it is that you're asking them to do this thing is just going to grease the wheels. If you can't explain, why did you give me this word search? Maybe you shouldn't give out the word search, because kids want to know why they should do things. If there is no reason at all, they're going to start pushing back, acting out. It doesn't go as well. And so I've always had really good success explaining to kids why they should do things. On that same note, and this is the last thing you should know about your students from this video anyway, is that students will be an adversary if you let them. If a kid just wants to be against you, you can't let that grow. And what I mean by that is if there's a student who's sitting in your classroom and they're just not going to listen, they're making you say everything twice, if you let that become an adversarial relationship, that kid will go with that and try to needle you and needle you and needle you. So some kids you need to kill with kindness. Some kids you need to just, hey, oh, you're out of your seat again. Okay, yeah, let's talk to your parents and figure out why you can't seem to remember this rule. And if you can keep it positive and light, even though you're saying something like, I'm going to call your parents and tell them you're out of your seat. You don't let them be an adversary, and keep it positive, especially after negative interactions. So if you're disciplining a kid, oh, hey, okay, this, I told you the rule, you didn't listen to it, here's the consequence. If you don't move on and find something positive to say to that student, before the end of class or at least the next day, there's an adversarial relationship that might grow, and it's something that's not great. So finding the positive, staying positive, and keeping, even though you're being strict, you're still trying to turn it around and say, okay, well, here's, framing whatever it is negative as a positive. It's a real skill that helps out a lot in keeping kids, they might not be your best friend, but at least they're not going to be working against you actively. So that's my advice for what you should know about your students.